This is the first slide that I showed in my presentation when Kate invited me to present as an inaugural graduate of our PPNE program. But I had already been steeped in Yap's embryosophy, and I had started taking it seriously to heart when I wrote a thesis. When I was 63, I got my BA in health arts and science. And I needed to use his ideas of the 4 embryonic developmental crisis to practice an embodied experience of when I would get crazy. You know, it was difficult. I had to not get spun out with my old histories of my own birth stories, for example. And I practiced the ideas that I'm going to be showing to you. When Kate asked me to present, I was pursuing another certification in spiritual direction. So I was pretty primed to come up with the idea of labyrinth and spiritual embryonic development because of those two certifications that I was working toward. The picture on the left is the image of the 800-year-old pattern that's in the Gothic cathedral in France, the Chartres Cathedral. And I ended up knowing that I was going to break the 4 crises into the quadrants, but I said, no, according to what I've learned from embryosophy, we're whole from the very beginning, we fall apart into ourselves, and it's not going to be, I'm not going to be able to delineate that in that way. So I got a pair of scissors and I printed out the pictures, which is right here. I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but the picture on the right is my kitchen. And I have a big, big old cutting board. Can't remember what it's called, but it's a big island with a big block of wood on it. And I had this all laid out and I cut each pattern, and as I cut, they fell out in the order that I was cutting them: conception, implantation, cardiogenesis, and forming a body. And I knew that I was being given something special. Because of the work that I had done as embodied experiences, applying what I learned in the embodiment skills that Kate talked about coming to my home and teaching us as an inaugural class of hers in this. I knew that the wisdom is an ontological condition expressing the triune wayfinding behaviors that we can all tap into because we all did it before we even had a functioning brain. Jarvis says that there is a profound difference between knowing about wisdom and being wise, for being wise is an ontological condition. And this is the way I needed to approach my pre and perinatal psychology education. Because even though I was trained in biodynamic craniosacral therapy, I did not want to put my hands on people. I did not want to work one-on-one. I wanted to be an educator. And I wanted to do it in the manner that Yap did it, using art and story. On the left, and I'm sorry I cannot cite this, I will find it if somebody wants it, but on the left you will see the embryo, and if you look carefully, you'll notice that it's a spiral. So when I cut these patterns, when I cut those patterns, this is what I got: conception, implantation, cardiogenesis, which is literally the heart of the cathedral's labyrinth, and then embodiment. And if you look on the right, you'll see that you get not only the templates, but you get a path when you laser cut the pattern. And it's not simply a spiral. It is a spiral, but it's an oscillating spiral. And Brian Freeman says that the embryo connection stalk in limited conditions of movement oscillates back and forth, almost like it's pre-exercising a walking gait. The walking gait that is the wayfinding behavior of labyrinth walking that I'm connecting those two things together. The next slide brings us to the front of the cathedral. I was never in Europe until 2019. And I went because it was important for me to have the experience and see what it was really like being a pilgrim, walking that 800-year-old pattern. And on the front tower, on the left here, where the left of the image, you'll see that it's the old Romanesque South Tower. On that tower is the Sheila na gig. Now, no one ever told me that the Sheila na gig, which is a grotesque that are found in different churches, sometimes over the doorways. It's a labia opened, exposing the genitalia, and it's called a Sheila na gig. And on that south tower, you can see on the third image over, the Sheila na gig is below a tumbler, like a jester. And then above that is the image to the right. And the image to the right has to do with an Aesop fable, ancient fable that was even popular during medieval and earlier, about the donkey who is holding the harp but can't play it because it has no hands. It signifies in Latin ignorantia. And I thought perhaps by teaching pre and perinatal birth psychology with the labyrinth, going back to the Middle Ages, because there was scholasticism going on then, there was the Chartres schools, people were studying mathematics. We may be in a similar time now where we can bring our science and our art together to get over the ignorance, to better understand what birth really might be and how it can change the world. Again, on the left is Hildegard of Bingen in 1164. Now, that cathedral was burned in 1194, and it certainly wasn't the first one. There were like 5 cathedrals on there. But that old Romanesque was around more in the time of Hildegard, 1165. And I thought, when I saw her universe iconography, that it reminded me of the second week of after conception. And Jaap says it's the second week going into the third week when it's your heart that brings you here. The first one is conception, and this is the outside. And you saw, he says it's a rotation, but it's like a global rotation. But the polar opposites that he talked about being so opposite take hours of negotiation. And when any new thing starts to happen to you, challenging your worldview or your form of identity or who you thought you were or what you thought you were going to be, there's going to be a bit of a vibration, a bit of a chaos, a bit of a negotiating of what was and what isn't yet. So Jaap is bringing these ideas out of the Middle Ages, of the medieval period, and bringing them into contemporary times. And Jung says that our modern attitude look back arrogantly upon the mists of superstition and of medieval or primitive credulity, entirely forgetting that we carry the whole living past in the lower stories of the skyscrapers of rational consciousness. Without the lower stories, our mind is suspended in mid-air, perhaps like windage. So I went to Chartres last year, and I stood in the center of the labyrinth. You can see the petals around where I'm standing. That's right at the heart, or the cardiogenesis template of the labyrinth. And if you look east, because pilgrims would have come in the west door, which is where the sun goes down. But when you walk and you've gotten all this reversion and turning and oscillating on this path, and you've come to the center, you are facing east. That's called ad orientem, and it's where the sun comes up. It's a new beginning. And way, way, way in the right image, at the very top, in the place of honor on that lancet window above the high altar, is the seat of wisdom. On the left. I have it in black and white with the color of the Christ child holding the red disc. But you'll notice that it is not the beautiful Mary and child of the blue window. It's the old Mary, the aged face, the bald homunculus. The art historians call this image of Christ the homunculus, and we know that that was an old understanding of what the embryo was. Whoops. So the homunculus is holding, the art historians don't know what this is. So I took the liberty of saying this is the embryos, Christ's placenta. He's holding the placenta. Francis Mott, in Mythology of Prenatal Life, quotes Rome. We talked about him in our class. And he says that some of the primitives in Australia were reported to have brought along their wanderings, in quotes, a placenta-shaped configuration called a churunga. So they would never give up the original bond of dual unity, which tied them to their mothers. This may be a little bit of a way to approach the placenta as everything out there. It's our original indigenousness. Everyone has it. Respecting the indigenous peoples, but everyone is indigenous because we are rooted in Mother, which is rooted in earth. The image on the right tells us, shows us the immortal fetus. And I include it because the church, of course, is Catholic, but what we're talking about is interspiritual. It's transpersonal. It belongs to every culture. And in the Eastern alchemical tradition, it's called the immortal fetus. But Dennis Klosik, who writes about Steiner, says that the highest that a person can do is reconceive themselves as spirit embryos. And I've changed that idea to embryodult. And the embryodult is someone who consciously reconceives themselves, their Christic selves, to be the highest person that they can be. Jung calls it yourself. Steiner called it the I am, and the Karuna of Hawaii says it's the parent that will never lie to you. So how to apply these stages, conception, implantation, cardiogenesis, and embodiment to spiritual formation? Because remember, I told you I was in spiritual direction school, and they didn't know quite what to do with me. because I was coming from a place that was sort of pioneering and again, bringing the pre and perinatal messages to broader audiences. So I knew, because I had used the embryoscopy to organically resolve midlife crisis, that I had to reconceive myself. And that was going to mean that I was falling apart into myself. What I thought I was had to implode. And then I needed, in the pre and perinatal psychology training, I needed to reach out. I needed to ask for help from the people around me and from the fellow students and from my Kate, who was my mentor. I had already been in years and years and years of Jungian analysis, but I still needed to individuate, fall apart. And I did that through going through the heart, which is preconception or reconception attraction complex is centripetal. Implantation is reaching out into the community. Again, if you do that, you end up being a wind egg. I didn't want to be a wind egg. I came back into my center, looked at my own heart, figured out how I was going to love, who I was going to love, who I was going to allow to love me, and really what love was. The last of the templates from the labyrinth is embodiment. And I did that by, you end up turning yourself inside out and rotating 180 degrees, which is a midlife task because you can't repeat what you did in the first part and the second half of your life. But it can be applied to any crisis. It can be applied to going through COVID, which is a voluntary confinement. You get those 4 patterns when you laser cut it, but the image on the left is the path that I have over my shoulder here. And as I was standing and walk the labyrinth during spiritual direction training, it was the top of the monastery in Toronto, and I was looking at the labyrinth, and just something came to me. I'm an artist educator. Something came to me and said, those are the cardinal movements of birth. So there I had it. I had embryonic performance to the cardinal movements of birth, which gave me the entire infant life narrative. And this is the center where I was standing in the cathedral, and you can see this is, you reconceive yourself down here. That's this template. Implantation is directly across from it. It's this one. And you think that you're going to go right into the heart of the labyrinth, but you don't. It takes you, it oscillates, it breathes, you go to the periphery, and then you come to the center, and you go to the periphery, and you come to the center. When you're standing in the center, there's still one more rotation that has to happen, the turning inside out and rotating 180 degrees. Again, these are gestures. This is phenomenon, and it can feel like that when you're going through these spiritual transformational stages. And you do it through the heart womb, and you do it with what the cardinal movements of birth are what the child does. You descend farther into the pelvic bowl. You flex your head almost in a bowing prayer kind of a way, so that the crown of your head can is in a better position to engage into the process. There's an rotation, and there's an external rotation or restitution. The internal rotation is when the head has to slip under the symphysis pubic bone and to be able to fit through that part of the pelvic bowl. And when the head is born, then the shoulders rotate. That's called restitution. It's almost like your head and your heart at that point of your transformative birth or rebirth process are one. You're not looking someplace else. Your head and your heart are in alignment, and then you can be born, and you do it through the heart womb.